Hey everyone, my name is Luke Thomas, and I will be leading you through this final week's topic of development. So, the first step of development is fertilization. This part of the image shows the egg and the corona radiata. The corona radiata is a layer of follicular cells that surrounds the egg. The first step of fertilization is the sperm penetrating that corona radiata, and one sperm is able to enter the egg. After this sperm has entered, it deposits its chromosomes in here, and the female pronucleus begins development. After the female pronucleus has developed, the male pronucleus will now develop, and you also see the formation of spindle fibers beginning. The fourth part of this is amphimixis occurring. That's the pronuclei coming together, and mitosis will occur for the first time. The end of mitosis will result in cleavage, and then cleavage will produce the first two cells, which are also known as blastomeres. This shows the further development of that embryo as it's moving down the fallopian tube and into the uterine cavity. So let's talk through this quickly. Here you see fertilization occurring, day 0. And days 1 through about 4 to 5, it's slowly moving down the fallopian tube and forming what we call a morula. The morula is just a ball of cells that are tightly packed together and all pretty much the same. Once this advanced morula enters the uterine cavity at around day 6, it forms a blastocyst. The blastocyst is different because it now has this blastocele. You have an inner cavity within the embryo and the inner cell mass here. The outer layer of cells is also called the trophoblast. Once the blastocyst is formed, it will then begin implantation into the uterine wall. If implantation occurs too early, so up in the fallopian tube, this is known as an ectopic pregnancy. Now let's look closer at the stages of implantation. Here you see the trophoblast. The trophoblast will begin to burrow into the uterine wall and also degrade into syncytial trophoblasts. Syncytial trophoblasts further erode a path through the uterine wall for implantation. As the syncytial trophoblast is degrading a path, it creates small pockets, as you can see here and here, called lacunae. Lacunae allow for maternal blood to provide nutrients and oxygen to the developing embryo. Now we see here a fully implanted embryo. If you want, you can pause this slide and read through the text boxes here. This is also in your lab textbook, but I'm just going to give the basic idea of what's happening. So, now implantation is pretty much completed, and you get the formation of this yolk sac. This is the accumulation of nutrients coming from the lacunae. Cells then begin to use these nutrients to begin migration, which is also called gastrulation. The process of migration is going to begin the formation of these 3 germ layers: the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. These 3 germ layers will eventually divide into all tissues of the human body. This process of differentiation into different organs is known as organogenesis. This table just shows exactly what tissues are coming from which germ layer. You don't have to know all of this, but I thought that it was interesting background information, and it's also in your lab manual. These 3 images show a further developed embryo turning into a fetus, and we're going to look at each of them a little bit closer. This picture shows an embryo at week 4. We can now definitely see the formation of major organs. As seen here, you have the heart, forebrain, eye, some arm and leg buds, but you can't really tell that it's a human. That could be just any sort of animal. By week 8, that's definitely changed. You can now easily see human features, and week 8 is kind of the transition between an embryo and a fetus. Some things I'd like to point out, you see the amnion here, this kind of bubble, and it's filled with amniotic fluid, which protects the embryo. You also see chorionic villi beginning to form. That is going to be the beginnings of the placenta. The placenta will provide all necessary nutrients and waste functions through the mother, and it does that through the umbilical cord. So any nutrients will come from the mother into the umbilical cord to the embryo, and waste will come out. Now we see what the fetus looks like at week 12. You can visually see that this is further development of the fetus, and this is close to the second trimester. This is just another diagram that shows early development. I'll walk through each of these real quick. Week 2, you can see the chorion beginning to develop around the embryo. Week 3, that chorion is now even further developed, and the amnion is now beginning to bulge out a little bit. You kind of see the beginnings of a head fold. Week 4, you can now clearly see a head fold and a tail fold developing, and you can also see it is beginning to bulge out a little bit here. By week 5, that bulging has greatly expanded into the uterine cavity. You can now see the embryo is taking up about half of the uterine cavity, and by week 10, that embryo is now filling almost the entirety of the cavity. You can also now see body formation is much more apparent, as well as the umbilical cord hooking into the placenta. Now keep this image in mind for the next slide we're going to go look at. So now you see the uterus here with the fetus inside and all of the skeletal components that are around it, as well as female sex organs. This just gives you further context. It's a sagittal view of a full-term pregnancy with now the surrounding organs for context. The last thing we're going to go over is the stages of birth. This, you have the dilation stage is the first stage. That's the onset of labor contractions. The cervix is going to begin to dilate and the fetus will start to move out of the uterine cavity. The expulsion stage is when the cervix is dilated to 10 centimeters and the fetus begins to pass through the cervix and vagina. The end of this stage will result in birth. And the final stage is the placental stage. This is where contractions are able to break the placenta free and it is delivered out of the body as afterbirth. That should cover the majority of what you need to know for development, and with the end of this video, it marks the end of material you need to know for this quarter. Note, there is no APR code this week because there will be no APR quiz. Alright, that marks the end of this lecture. I hope everybody has a good week and good luck on your assignments.